True scary school stories. At 15, I was just another high school kid in a small town. That day started like any other: classes, jokes with friends, and the usual cafeteria chaos. But as I walked back to class after lunch, the intercom crackled to life. "Attention, students and staff. This is your principal. We are on lockdown. This is not a drill." His voice carried a weight I'd never heard before. The chatter around me died instantly. A strange tension filled the air, like we all knew something terrible was coming, but no one could say it. Teachers started barking orders, and we were herded toward the gym and locker rooms. My phone barely worked, no way to refresh the news or check in with my parents. Then came the sound, a sharp, echoing bang that froze everyone in place. People started screaming. The noise grew louder, heavy footsteps thudding closer. My pulse raced, panic clawing at my chest as we scrambled to hide, cramming ourselves into tight spaces, praying to be invisible. It felt like time had stopped, each second dragging us closer to something awful. It became clear that there wasn't enough space in the locker room for everyone. I made a snap decision and darted for one of the side doors that led outside. My gym teacher barely glanced at me, his focus elsewhere. I ran toward the soccer field, the cold air biting at my face, then dove for cover near the tree line. My hand shook as I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call my mom. Before I could dial, a voice called from behind me. "What are you doing?" I spun around, startled, to see Tanner, a kid I barely knew but had seen around school for years. He was holding something sharp, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that froze me in place. My heart pounded as I realized this wasn't just some scared kid hiding out like me. Tanner stood there gripping an AR-15 style rifle, his finger twitching near the trigger. A handgun was strapped to his side. His stare was cold, like he wasn't even seeing me, just through me. "Tanner, come on, man. You don't have to do this," I said, my voice shaking as much as my hands. My heart felt like it might explode, every second feeling like it could be my last. But something about his expression seemed uncertain. "Look," I started, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "This doesn't have to be it. Whatever's going on, there's another way. Please, man, just think about this." For a long time, he didn't say anything. He just stared, the rifle still aimed at me. Then, after what felt like an eternity, his grip on the gun wavered. Slowly, he lowered it, his shoulders slumping. To my shock, he started crying, his whole body shaking as he muttered something about wanting it all to stop. Before I could say more, he spun around and walked off, disappearing into the woods without another word. I just stood there, frozen, trying to process what had happened. My instincts kicked in. I had to get out of there. I ran toward the park near the school. The playground was empty, the swings creaking softly in the wind. I ducked behind the fence, gasping for air, trying to figure out what to do next. Then I heard footsteps crunching through the grass. I peeked out, my pulse skyrocketing again. But it was Robert. Relief flooded through me. He was one of my closest friends, and in that moment, I was never so glad to see him. "Dude," he panted, catching up. "I saw everything. I thought Tanner was going to. I thought you were done for." His words hung in the air, raw and heavy. "I followed you out when I saw you run. I couldn't let you be alone." The two of us stayed crouched there for a while, talking in hushed tones about what had just happened. Eventually, we learned Tanner had surrendered to the cops without putting up a fight. Nobody got hurt that day, but it could have easily gone the other way. When I finally made it home, I collapsed into my mom's arms, sobbing as I told her everything. Tanner had always been the quiet kid, the one everyone picked on. I don't excuse what he planned to do, but I can't stop thinking about how broken he must have been. Something about the way we treat each other has to change. This story took place at a public college in Indonesia, though I can't remember the exact name or location. It happened years ago in a dorm for female students during their orientation week. One freshman had been assigned a shared room, but for some reason, her roommate never moved in, leaving her alone. During orientation, the upperclassmen gave the new students a chilling warning. Asterisk, don't open your door if someone knocks late at night. Asterisk, when asked why, the seniors hesitated before finally explaining. It was about the spirit of a former student. Apparently, years before, a girl had a huge argument with her boyfriend over the phone one night. Desperate for someone to talk to, she went knocking on every door in the building, but no one answered. It was late, and everyone ignored her. Feeling completely hopeless, she went to the top floor and jumped. Since then, students claimed her ghost wandered the halls, knocking on doors at the exact hour she died. After hearing this, the girl became uneasy and decided not to sleep in her room that night. As evening fell, she couldn't help but replay the story over and over in her mind. Time seemed to drag, and soon enough, she began to hear soft knocking, faint at first, at the far end of the hall. The sound moved closer, door by door, and with it came a woman's voice, pleading. "Is anyone there to talk to me?" The knocks grew louder, and the voice more desperate as they neared her room. Frozen with fear, the girl crawled under her bed, pulling her blanket tightly around her. When the knocking stopped at her door, she held her breath, expecting to hear the same question again. But instead, the voice whispered, "Finally, I found someone." The girl fainted instantly. Later, she learned something horrifying. The ghost, it turned out, dragged her head along the floor as she moved, her legs twisted and pointing upwards in an unnatural way. By hiding under her bed, the girl had unknowingly positioned herself directly in the ghost's line of sight through the small gap at the bottom of the door. This happened when my youngest was just 5 years old. I've got 3 kids, and they each have their own rooms. But for some reason, that night, my middle child decided to bunk with the youngest. Our house is pretty big, with the kids' rooms all in one wing, and mine on the other side, so I was quite a distance away from them. It was late summer in Florida, and the heat was suffocating. Even with the AC running, the house felt sticky and uncomfortable. I couldn't settle down to sleep, so I kept getting up and pacing, restless. Around 2:30 a.m., I decided to check on the kids. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard a faint voice coming from their room. At first, I thought maybe one of them was talking in her sleep, but then I saw my youngest walking out of their room, heading toward the front door. I rushed over and managed to catch up with her before she could unlock it. "What are you doing?" I asked, confused. She looked up at me, her little face serious, and said, "My teacher is outside the window. He needs me to let him in." She was in kindergarten, and her teacher was a sweet, older lady. I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't want to frighten her. I knelt down and gently asked, "Are you sure? Maybe you were just dreaming." But she was adamant, pulling on my hand and insisting, "He's waiting right now." Something in my gut told me to check it out. I moved to the window in her room and peered out. At first, all I saw was the darkness, but then I caught a shadow flicker past. My heart raced. I quickly yanked the curtains shut and, panic rising, immediately called the police. By the time they arrived, whoever it was had vanished. Outside, they found a single set of deep footprints in the dirt, men's size 12, right beneath her window. We pressed her with questions, trying to make sense of who this teacher could be. She said he had long hair and looked like someone she knew, but couldn't quite place. Weeks later, during Sunday school, she saw a picture of Jesus hanging on the wall. Without hesitation, she pointed at it and said, "That's him. That's my teacher." That was it. After that, I wasn't taking any chances. We installed an alarm system and sealed her window shut. The thought of anyone or anything coming for one of my kids kept me up at night for months. When I was just starting school, I attended Pinewood Elementary, and our school where I spent kindergarten through 5th grade. It's strange to think it's been about 15 years since I was a student there. I was generally a good student, picking things up quickly except for math, which was always a struggle. I made a lot of friends, including twin girls with rhyming names who looked very similar, though my memory of them is a bit hazy now. There was a teacher there, let's call him Mr. Parker. I'm not sure if he was their direct teacher or not, but it was around 3rd or 4th grade when things started to unravel. Whispers began circulating among the staff, parents, and even some of the kids. One morning, we saw police cars outside the school, and we initially thought it was just another community visit, like when they'd come to talk about their jobs. We were wrong. Later that week, papers were sent home to every family, explaining what had happened. It turned out Mr. Parker had been involved in deeply disturbing activities. He had stored inappropriate pictures and videos of children on his computers and phone. He had also made students do inappropriate dances and other things while recording them. When parents discovered this, understandably, everyone was in shock and outrage. Those police cars we saw that morning, they were there because they had spotted Mr. Parker and apprehended him after a chase. He was arrested immediately. I have no idea where he ended up, but I sincerely hope he's on every offender registry for the rest of his life. To anyone who went through that with Mr. Parker, I am truly sorry, and I hope you received the support you needed to cope with what that horrible person did. The bell rang, and Miss Carter walked into the lively Class 2C. This group of 16-year-olds was her favorite, despite their knack for mischief. She greeted them with a warm smile before flipping open her history textbook. Seated at the front were 2 of her boldest students, Maya and Olivia, who were whispering and giggling as the lesson began. But then, without warning, their laughter abruptly stopped. Both girls went deathly pale, their gazes fixed on the old wooden teacher's desk in the corner of the room. Miss Carter's curiosity piqued, but her irritation began to grow. What were they staring at? She followed their wide-eyed stares, but she didn't see anything unusual. The room grew unnervingly quiet, as if the entire class could feel the tension in the air. Seeing nothing out of place, Miss Carter shrugged, leaned against the desk, and resumed her lecture. Then, a sudden sharp gasp broke the silence, followed by Maya and Olivia letting out piercing screams. They bolted from the room, leaving the rest of the class wide-eyed and stunned. Alarmed, Miss Carter quickly told the class monitor to maintain order and dashed after the girls. She found them trembling in the school cafeteria, their faces streaked with tears. Other teachers had gathered around, trying to comfort the 2, but their cries continued, growing more frantic by the second. It felt like forever before the girls finally calmed down enough to speak. Their voices were shaky and uneven as they tried to explain what had happened. There was a woman, Maya stammered, her eyes wide with fear. She was old. Her face was twisted, like she hated us. She was behind the desk, Olivia whispered, barely above a murmur, smiling at us. Miss Carter's stomach dropped. What do you mean? What happened? When you sat at the desk, Olivia said, the figure, it floated behind you, Maya added. It was staring right at us. Both girls nodded, their faces pale with terror. They swore they had both seen the same horrifying apparition. The school called in their parents, and the counselor tried to make sense of the story, but neither Maya nor Olivia could be convinced to set foot back in that classroom after that day. Despite the intense questioning, no one else reported anything unusual, but the air in that room always felt colder from then on. When I was about 14, I had an unsettling experience that still makes my skin crawl. I was painfully quiet back then, so my circle of friends was small. On the first day of sophomore year, I ended up sitting next to a guy in class. Let's call him Danny. He must have been 19 or maybe even older, and something about him just felt off. At first, I brushed it off. He seemed friendly enough. By the time lunch rolled around, I was excited to hang out with my usual group, my best friend Luke and his buddy Tom. Luke had been like family to me ever since I moved to live with my dad years ago. I trusted him more than anyone. Tom was in my film class where I first met Danny. That day at lunch, Danny just slid into our group like he belonged there. I assumed he knew Tom somehow, so I didn't say anything. But after a while, Danny started creeping me out. No matter where I went in school, it seemed like he was always nearby. He had this annoying habit of standing way too close to me, invading my personal space. If I asked him to back up, he'd joke about how other guys stood closer. For context, I'm in a wheelchair, and Danny was super tall. It was uncomfortable, to say the least. But it got darker from there. I found out Danny had saved my school login info on his computer. I felt sick when I discovered it, but I tried to handle it myself. I asked him to delete it, and he claimed he had. But his behavior only got worse. The worst part was during our film class. For projects, we had to work in small groups, and Danny always insisted on teaming up with me. I was too polite to refuse, even when the teacher started pairing us randomly. But before that, he kept trying to get me to go with him to the fields behind the school to film something. The way he said it made my stomach churn. His tone was so off-putting, I flat out refused to leave the classroom. Thankfully, my teacher was understanding and never forced anyone to go outside if they didn't want to. Danny would end up filming alone, and I'd handle the editing. One day, when Danny was out filming, I decided to check if he'd really deleted my login info. He hadn't. Worse, he had dozens of other students' logins saved in the same document. That's when I finally got scared enough to report it. I went to my school counselor, hoping they'd take it seriously. Big mistake. Instead of keeping it discreet, they went straight to Danny and told him a girl from his class had reported him. The next day at lunch, he showed up furious, accusing me outright. I denied it, of course, and Luke and Tom backed me up. That's when I learned something that made my blood run cold. Neither of them knew Danny. He'd only started sitting with us because of me. Even with this glaring evidence, the school didn't think it was serious. My counselor decided my concerns weren't important enough to notify the police or even my dad. The most they did was talk to Danny, which, in hindsight, just made things worse. After that, Danny became even more aggressive. Every day, he'd pressure me to meet him somewhere secluded behind the school. His tone shifted from asking to insisting, like I had no choice. He started coming up with bizarre excuses for why we needed to be alone. I felt trapped and confused, wondering if I was overreacting. I didn't tell anyone except the school and later, my teacher. But my friends must have sensed how bad things were getting. They started walking me to class whenever they could. When I finally confided in my teacher, he didn't hesitate to step in. He rearranged the seating chart so Danny couldn't sit near me and permanently assigned me to another group. That small act made me feel a little safer. Danny graduated at the end of that year, and I thought I was finally rid of him. But a couple of years later, when I was about 17, he popped back into my life, this time through my email. I didn't even read the message. I just blocked him immediately. Hey Reddit, I've got a story from my first year of high school that still gives me the chills. This happened when I started 9th grade in Minnesota. There was this kid in my class. Let's call him Jake. We'd sometimes chat about homework, but honestly, I didn't think much of him at first since we barely spoke. But things got weird in the second half of the year, and it started with this group project we got stuck doing together. I remember catching Jake staring at my chest across the table. Super uncomfortable, right? And before anyone asks, I was wearing a thick sweater that covered everything. What made it even stranger was that I was really small-chested and self-conscious about it, so his staring made no sense at all. That was just the beginning, though. After that day, he started staring at me everywhere, during class, in the hallways, you name it. But now, he'd focus on my face instead. I tried to ignore it, but I could always feel his eyes on me. Sometimes, I'd accidentally make eye contact with him, and instead of looking away like a normal person, he'd just keep staring. No blinking. His eyes were cold, empty, like something out of a horror movie. It got so bad that I'd break down crying when I got home. I was terrified of what was going on in his head, and it left me feeling really unsafe. But the worst day came during a group presentation. We weren't ready to present in class, so we stayed after school for tutoring to finish it. Honestly, I was relieved because fewer people would be watching us present. I was just waiting for my turn when Jake and his friend suddenly walked in. My stomach dropped, and I started freaking out. Jake sat at a desk right behind the teacher, and I tried to convince myself that he was just there to study. But boy, was I wrong. When it was my turn to present, I glanced over and saw him, literally humping the table while staring straight at me. He had this disgusting, smug smile on his face, and I just froze. I completely messed up my part of the presentation, which sucked because it affected the whole group's grade. Jake finally left after we finished, and I started calming down a bit. But when everyone began leaving, I got super nervous about walking out alone. The school was empty by then, and I had no idea where he might be lurking. Thank God my mom was already waiting outside, and I basically ran to her car, crying the whole way. After that, I got really into evil eye jewelry. If you don't know what that is, it's an ancient protection thing that's supposed to reflect bad energy back at whoever's sending it. They say that when the charm has absorbed too much negative energy, it either breaks or disappears. So, I bought a bunch of evil eye bracelets and wore one every day. Call me crazy, but I swear they worked. One time, when Jake was doing his creepy stare routine again, I had my bracelet on. Within minutes, he started coughing like crazy and had to go to the nurse. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but I like to think my bracelet did its job. By the end of the term, he gradually stopped staring. Looking back, I should have told someone in charge, but honestly, I was just relieved it was over. I still get nervous whenever I see him around campus here in Nevada. I can't wait to graduate and get far away from him. For anyone dealing with similar creeps, please tell a teacher or counselor. Keeping it bottled up only makes things worse. Trust me on this one. It's wild to think that almost 8 years have passed since that day, but the memory still feels as fresh as if it just happened. Maybe it's because I've told this story so many times that I've got it memorized now. Honestly, I feel a little strange calling myself lucky, but compared to some others, I guess I was. I didn't see as much of the chaos as some of my classmates did. There are people I knew back then who didn't come out of it okay, not even close. I'll never forget one girl, smart and always friendly, the kind of person everyone liked. But after that day, things started going downhill for her. She dropped out in what should have been our senior year, and there were rumors about drugs. My sister later told me she had died from an overdose shortly after leaving rehab. She left behind 2 little kids, now raised by their grandparents. A lot of my classmates ended up struggling with depression and other issues, all tied to what happened. Some of them never seemed to fully heal. Anyway, I usually start this story by saying it was late spring during our freshman year. I lived in a small town in Washington, and the sky was thick with clouds, which wasn't unusual, but it was strangely warm and muggy. You'd sweat just standing still. The classrooms didn't have air conditioning, so between periods, everyone flooded into the courtyard, hoping to catch a little breeze. At the time, I had 2 sisters. My younger sister was still in middle school, and my older sister, a junior, had been homesick all week with a bad stomach bug. Looking back, I'm really glad she wasn't there that day. It was a Friday, and everyone was buzzing with excitement for the long Memorial Day weekend. My parents had planned to take us to a nearby lodge, a popular getaway spot for families in our town. I spent the morning texting my friends about what we'd do over the weekend, cracking jokes about the usual 15-year-old stuff. Little did I know, everything was about to change in a way I couldn't have imagined. That quarter, I had PE during first period, and we were out on the stadium turf playing flag football. When the class ended, I offered to take the equipment back to the upstairs gym supply closet, thinking it would save everyone time. The locker rooms and gym were on the west side of the school, separated from the main classrooms by a large courtyard. After stowing away the cones and jerseys, I decided to leave the supply closet unlocked, since another gym class was scheduled right after ours. I didn't realize then that leaving it open would be the decision that would save my life. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard it. Pop, pop, pop. I froze, trying to figure out what the sound was, but before I could process it, the scream started. Chaos erupted as students and staff bolted through the hallways, slamming doors behind them in desperation. My body moved before my mind could catch up. I turned and sprinted back upstairs, adrenaline pumping through every vein. By the time I reached the supply closet and locked myself in, 5 more gunshots echoed through the halls. I collapsed in the corner, shaking, burying my face in my knees as tears poured down. More gunshots rang out scattered, terrifying. Then silence. A silence so thick and overwhelming it made every second feel like an hour. Time became meaningless. My phone was downstairs in the locker room, so I couldn't check the time or call for help. There was no way I was leaving the safety of that pitch-black closet, not for anything. The hardest part of hiding wasn't the fear. It was the helplessness. I couldn't text my mom to tell her I was alive. I couldn't ask if my sisters were safe. All I could do was sit there, shaking, whispering prayers to any god who might listen. I kept repeating to myself how lucky I was that my older sister was homesick. If she had been at school, the worry would have eaten me alive. In that suffocating darkness, all I could do was wait. Wait to be found or to meet my end. It felt like an eternity before I heard the footsteps. Sitting in that pitch-black closet, drowning in fear, was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Then, suddenly, I wasn't alone. 2 sets of hurried footsteps echoed up the stairs and into the gym above me. For a few seconds, there was silence, just long enough for my heart to pound even harder before a single deafening pop shook the rafters. My ears rang as I froze, sure that this was it. Death was coming for me. The footsteps moved toward the closet door, each step louder and more deliberate than the last. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the sliver of light under the door as it was blocked by a shadow. Terror clawed at my chest as the doorknob rattled violently, and I broke into sobs, imagining I'd never see my family again. My fate felt sealed, left to a gunman with no mercy. I could hardly process it when the knob broke off and light flooded the dark space. What happened next is a blur. The door was yanked open, and instead of a gunman, it was a SWAT officer. He grabbed me, pulling me to my feet and sprinting with me out of the gym. I barely felt my feet touch the ground as he kept my head down, shielding me from the worst of what was around us. But not all of it. Blood smeared across the hallways and courtyard as we ran, marking the path of devastation. It's an image that has never left me. The shooter wasn't someone I knew well, but my sister had mentioned him before. He was a junior, angry, distant. From what she said, he struggled in school and often lashed out. She'd seen him lose his temper, flipping desks and storming out of class. I guess he didn't have many friends, and his frustration boiled over that day. As I was stowing away the gym equipment, he got into an argument with someone in the courtyard. It escalated fast. He pulled a gun and shot the other student 3 times before turning on the crowd. The chaos that followed was unimaginable. He killed a teacher who tried to intervene and then hid under the bleachers in the downstairs gym. When officers found him, he fled upstairs, and that's when it all ended. The gunman was shot by the SWAT team right there in the gym. I didn't see it happen, thank God, but I heard enough to piece it together later. That day haunted me for years. I struggled with anxiety for a long time after, but I've built a good life since then. If there's one thing I've taken away from it all, it's that I never go anywhere without planning an escape route or knowing my options. It's a habit I'll carry for the rest of my life. During my high school years, from 2002 to 2005, ages 15 to 18, I took several advanced math courses, Calculus I, Calculus II, and another I can't quite recall, all taught by the same man. What struck me as odd was his behavior when students needed help. He'd stand incredibly close to the girls, pressing his leg against theirs and sometimes placing his hand on their necks. But with the male students, he'd simply lean over their desks, maintaining a professional distance. It gave me a really uneasy feeling. This was in Tennessee, years after the satanic panic of the 90s in the US, where many teachers were fired based on rumors. By the time I was in school, the pendulum had swung, and it felt like kids weren't believed anymore. Teachers were always right. I was around 15 when I first had Mr. Wilson, and yes, that was his actual name, and almost 18 by my last class with him. One day, I finally gathered the courage to tell my mom about how strange he was acting. Her response was a blow. "Don't you dare say that about him, Sarah. He's such a good person. He lives with his sick mother and teaches immigrant kids for free." That's when I realized my mom would trust a potentially creepy adult over her own daughter. After that, I kept quiet about any unsettling vibes I got from people. The whole thing still bothers me. This was a grown man in a position of authority over teenagers, including kids who barely spoke English. The fact that he still lived with his mother and, as far as I knew, never dated, just added to the sketchy feeling. I never heard anything concrete about him actually harming a student, but honestly, it wouldn't surprise me. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and we will see you in the next video.